I want you to take me seriously, right? Isn't that why I'm up here, standing on a stage, wearing a microphone, wearing my nice clothes? I mean, I'm speaking slowly and emphatically. I have a PhD, come on. And that's a lot of markers to show that I have status, right? As a scientist, I can tell you, status matters. It's how you get people to listen. But it's not the only way. You can also get people to listen by cracking a joke, by not being so serious, by not taking yourself so seriously. A joke is a surprise. It's an invitation to see what surprises are next. So for me, as a physicist who works on nanomaterials for novel electronics, I find myself cracking jokes all the time. My work is about building electronics that are structured like the brain to interface with the brain itself. I'm basically enabling the cyborg revolution. And as my dad always said to me, if you can present new scientific results and crack a joke about them, it shows that you're really confident in your work. But I think there's more to it than that. Science and comedy have a lot in common. They're both creative. They're both about thinking outside the box, about upending traditional frameworks, about not accepting the status quo. And science is about truth. And comedy is about, well, comedy is famously not universal, right? What you find funny depends on context. It depends on our shared understandings of the world around us. It depends on national character. It depends on culture. So I would tell different jokes at a physics conference than I would at a stand-up comedy night. This is because the things that physicists tend to laugh at are a bit weird, which is why everyone else tends to laugh at physicists. So thanks. But even if comedy is not universal, I think it's something that we all do. Everyone has a sense of humor somewhere. And when we do the act of comedy, when we make jokes, we're actually fulfilling a lot of important social functions. You know, if you and I laugh at the same jokes, that means we're part of the same team, right? Comedy is also a great social equalizer. It breaks down socioeconomic barriers. Because think about it, who's the perfect butt of a joke? It's a high-status person, like a businessman walking and slipping on a banana peel. That's funny. But if you make fun of someone who has low status, that's punching down. It's not good comedy. So comedy innately upends these social hierarchies. And comedy is important for forming identity. You know, if you laughed at my physics joke, maybe that means you're more likely to identify as science positive, which in this case is a good thing, not an STI. Comedy is also a really important way to talk about trickier things. You know, comedy news shows like The Daily Show and Last Week Tonight are actually more popular than the real news a lot of the time. Have you ever heard the saying, laugh so you don't cry? I think in our current political climate, that's especially apt. And comedy is a great way to talk about even challenging academic topics. So I run a comedy night in Ireland called Bright Club, where academics come and learn how to talk about their research using stand-up comedy. I've taught people to tell jokes about their research who study things like physics, space, medieval literature, music, gender theory, you name it. It turns out that comedy is an amazing way to engage with these challenging academic subjects and cutting-edge research. I've also tried to get academics to do comedy sets about their research in areas like human rights violations and torture. It turns out that torture comedy is not as popular as you might think. Apparently, I'm a bad person for asking. But I think that even in these really tough subjects, you know, if we can find the surprise, the funny, the humanity, it's a way to humanize the things that are hard to talk about. We laugh, so we don't cry. And of course, the most obvious fact about comedy is also the truest. It's fun. right? Comedy doesn't have to always be about difficult subjects, nor should it be. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take comedy seriously. Because think about it, when you're listening to a joke, what are you doing? You're waiting for the punchline. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the script to be flipped, waiting for the reveal. You're open to changing your mind. And in fact, you expect to. So doesn't that make comedy kind of the perfect antidote for this echo chamber bubble world that we're all increasingly living in? I mean, it's no fun to only talk to people who agree with you, but it's also tough if you try to engage with a new way of looking at something and you get piled on or harassed for it. So if you're interested in thinking about lots of different perspectives when you form your own opinion, well, comedy has that built in. And if comedy can help someone think about a new angle on an important subject, I think that's amazing. I think it's an immense social good, and it's also a friendly way to talk about what matters. Now, I sometimes wonder if the reason that I think comedy is so important for everyone is that it was really important for me growing up. My dad and I used to tell jokes back and forth to each other all the time. Old jokes, new jokes, long jokes, short jokes. We would go through all of Who's on First together. You know, the classic Abbott and Costello routine about a baseball team. We would practice telling these long jokes with elaborate setups and very convoluted punchlines. And then when we got really good at them, we'd go back and retell the jokes, getting every element of the punchline subtly wrong, and then present the final mangled punchline as if it was a triumph instead of a failure. Because a failure is funny too, right? Well, the biggest joke of all is that about 1.5 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with colon cancer. He had to be hospitalized, he needed emergency surgery, had to start chemotherapy. And it was awful. It wasn't funny at all, at first. And then I went to see this amazing comedy show called Edwin, Salmon versus Cancer, where the comedian, Edwin Salmon, got up and talked about how he had been diagnosed with the exact same cancer as my dad, was going through a lot of the same treatments and procedures, and talking about what was funny or weird or surprising in that experience. It was real, and it was hilarious, and it helped me find the humanity in what had been this really tough experience. Humor became a major way that my dad and I dealt with his cancer. In addition to medicine, I mean. I don't want to advocate some sort of humoropathy here. At one point, he was going into surgery, and he had signed over power of attorney to me. So I told him, how much I loved him, and then I described at length the tattoos that I was going to have the operating room staff put across his belly while he was under. My favorite was Rebel for Life. And then afterwards, when he was coming up from the anesthesia, and someone said to him, "Eric, can you hear me?" Without even opening his eyes, he just shook his head. He was barely conscious, and he had a tube down his throat, and still his first instinct was to make a joke. Later on, I was sitting with him in the hospital, and I heard him tell some visitors a story from my childhood. It was about how, when I was 3 or 4, I was afraid of ghosts, and so he developed this ghost removal procedure to do anytime that I got scared. So, if I woke up in the middle of the night and I called him in, I said, "Dad, I'm scared that there's ghosts in my room." He would check under the bed, and he would look behind the curtains, and if he found any ghosts, he'd eat them. Problem solved, right? And I said, "Dad, no wonder you ended up with colon cancer. Your bowels are full of ghosts. They're straight up haunted." Fortunately, he laughed too. And over the course of my life with my dad, we developed not a universal comedy, but a very personal one that was based on our own way of kidding around with and affirming each other, of remembering and remixing the overlapping strands of our lives. Humor is a way, even in the toughest times, to show that we are creative, thinking, feeling beings. Comedy is a way to show our humanity, to say that we can laugh and we can cry. A month ago, my dad passed away. And I got to tell him that I loved him, how proud I was of him. And I told him that when this was all over, I was going to tell him about a new business venture I was getting involved in. I said, Dad, I am looking to invest in this baseball team. They're really talented, but the players have some peculiar names. And without missing a beat, my dad said, oh yeah? Who's on first? Thank you.